Hey folks, Ariel and Burley over here at Nyth. I know I usually do fireside chats, but it's actually kind of warm this morning. It's already like 50 degrees. Don't worry, it's not going to stay warm, I'm sure, because they're calling for a chance of snow flurries the next couple. But today is nice and warm and sunny, so I didn't need to light the fire for anything, so I figured I'd do a wood pile chat. And no, this firewood doesn't fit in my little tiny wood stove. This is for the outdoor fire pit. Anyway, continuing the series of stuff about my experiences with property purchasing. If you don't know what I'm talking about, watch the last two videos because I've already gone over a bunch of things. And got a lot of questions and a lot of good tips from a lot of folks. And I meant to have this follow-up video out a little sooner, but I was tied up the last few days with a really cool experience of getting to watch several mountain lions on a kill that's not here in the yard, but fairly near my house. So at some point there'll be a video of that footage, but that involved a lot of very long hours of sitting and observing. And if you're on MeWe, you've already seen some of the photos from that, but there will be a video of some mountain lions coming out when I have time to put it together. Anyway, maybe get this out a little slower than I was planning. So first I went over kind of what I was looking for in, for myself in property shopping, and why. And then the next one was kind of about the some of the various issues over the years of property shopping that I've done, that I've run into. Now I wanted to address just a few more of the kind of practical aspects of those things, and I even made myself a list of notes so I wouldn't forget some of them. So when once you've gone through the things I've talked about before with, general location and knowing what your goals are and therefore what you're looking for and so on, once I've got to the point of, I'm looking at this piece of property, this particular place at this address or whatever, I think this one looks interesting. I like a lot of things about it, I think. It's in my price range, whatever. So I'm looking at this particular spot now. A lot of times, and I got a bunch of questions about where can you find good properties. Anywhere there's properties listed, there may be good or usually plenty of, not necessarily bad ones, but ones that don't fit what you're looking for, so they're bad for you. Zillow, LandWatch, Realtor.com. I know in some areas some places have kind of an area-specific website. Like I've got some friends in Tennessee. I don't remember what it's called, but there's a real estate listing site that kind of just covers their area and tends to have everything on it. So depending on your spot, you might have something like that as well. But just look at it, and most places you look online have an option to sort, the listings from newest to oldest. So if at some point, if you start shopping today, you can go through everything that's there, but at some point you know what's already there and whether you are and are not interested in. So if you leave it set, or reset it to show you the newest listings, then every day you could just click, if you're actively property shopping, just every day click on it and see if there's anything new at the top of the list that you have not already investigated. So I found properties that were interesting to me listed through all of those places. I think there's a landsofamerica.com, and anyway, and for the most part, all of them tend to list the same properties. Like you can find the same listing multiple times on all the sites. I think redfish, whatever that is, and there's some more. So anyway, I would look at all those and find, newer properties. But then once I'd find one, I'd think, oh, this looks interesting. It's in our price range. It's cool. We like these features about it or whatever. Then often before even going to see it, if you're right next door, that's less of an issue. But if you have to drive for a little bit, that's a little more of an issue. Some of the tools I would do to check out more info about it, so I would know if it was, worth the time to go see, would be Google Earth is actually a great resource for this, because you can look at the property from the air. Now be aware that in some of these more remote rural areas, those photos that they use for that imagery are not really updated. Like in some areas I've looked, I know they're at least more than a decade old, because this building was built at this time and the building is not there on the satellite imagery. So there may well be things there that are not shown on the images looking down. Like you may look at a place, and this happened, we look at a place and it's like, oh, that's really cool. It's it's not a very big lot, but there's no one else around it. We went to see it and realized since that image was taken from the air, there's now dozens of houses around it, and it wasn't what it looked like at all. But what doesn't tend to change very quick is the actual terrain, the mountains and hills and valleys and streams. So if I think a place is interesting because I live in a very northernly, place, and I was looking for something that had either, was tipped slightly south or at least open and had exposure to the south for more sunlight for being able to better grow veggies. You can take, from a computer, I don't know how it works from a smartphone, I've never had one, but you can, tip it from looking like a flat image to looking at it like you're a person standing on the ground, and you can see the terrain, and you can kind of spin it around. And so from the property you're looking at, you can see, oh, there's a giant hill right to the south that's not on this property, but that would block all of my sunshine in the winter or something like that. So that's a useful resource, because sometimes I would look at something on there as to how the terrain looks, and that right there would be like, okay, I don't need to go take the time to look at this place in person, because I can see there's something that would, eliminate it for something that's important to me. So other really helpful resources. Every now and then you get a good, somebody who writes a really good real estate listing who actually includes this stuff, but the majority do not. Especially when you're looking at more bare land type of properties, you tend to get a lot of listings that like have a couple photos, sometimes just of a tree or a plant. Nothing as pretty as a burley, no. And the listing description is something like beautiful vacant land property, or something, a single sentence that's not particularly descriptive and doesn't really give you a whole lot of info. But some other resources you can use are, if you're interested in growing things, of course growing zones don't tell you everything you need to know about growing things, but they do tell you a lot of useful info. So you can pull up the, U.S. Climate growing zone map or whatever, for your area, either the whole state or whatever area you're looking at. And often within, especially in mountainy areas, within a general area, you can see, oh, this spot must stay a lot colder, and this spot's a little warmer, and over here is kind of medium. So you can see, okay, I'm looking at this property, where does it fall in there? Is it a colder spot, a warmer spot? What am I looking for, and so on. So that can be helpful. You can also usually find online a county GIS map, which you can usually click on and off, different layers. So if you're looking at this property, you can click like lot lines, and they're generally not precise, almost always not precise. So don't count, if you're like, this tree looks right on the edge, but I think it's on this property, they're not that precise. But you can get a general idea of, okay, I'm looking at this square, and all the lots beside it are really tiny little pieces, or oh, the lot beside it is a 100-acre chunk, or whatever. That can be helpful. You can check lot lines. You can check often soil surveys, if that's interesting to you. What kind of, and again, they're not specific to what's right here, but through the area they'll say this is mostly limestone, or this is mostly sand, or and so on. So if the type of soil or rock or lack thereof or whatever that's there is important to you, that's something you can check out on your own before ever going to look at the property, and get some of that info of what they know about the geology of the area. You can also usually click on an overlay for like flood zones, so you can check if that's something that should be disclosed in a property listing, but it's not always. Is this area in a flood zone? Is it, because around here we have every year flood zones, where if a creek flows right here for most of the year, in the spring it gets this wide and then goes back in, so you have that like every year flood zone strip right along it. And then you have the 100-year flood zone kind of thing, which maybe you do or don't care about, but it's just something to be aware of, because if you are interested in building a house and not having it wash away or go underwater, or specifically getting insurance for it or reselling it, that's definitely something to consider. And there's usually a whole bunch of different overlays for all kinds of different things. Those are the overlays I found most useful for finding out, what does the neighboring property layouts look like in general, where roads or streams, where are flood zones, that kind of thing. But you can probably find all that like sitting on your couch from a computer or phone before you ever take the time to go look at a property. So that can all be really useful. And there are tons of times in that 5 years or whatever I spent property shopping, and Clay as well, where we'd see something, get all excited and be like, oh, this sounds good and it's really cool, and you'd look up one or more of those things, and you'd be like, oh, well, that's not for us, because sometimes a listing would not mention that it was in a subdivision or an HOA at all. but you would look at a plat map and you'd see, oh, it's this little cul-de-sac road that comes in, and another cul-de-sac, and it's all these neat little lots laid out like this around all of that. That's fairly obviously in a subdivision, which maybe you want. We didn't. But you can find out a lot of those things, especially on a not well described listing for yourself, before you ever have to go look at it, call a realtor or call the owner, whoever's selling it, that kind of thing. And that can be useful because it saves a lot of time. Or sometimes you'd look at, again, you can look at Google Earth and there may well be new things created since, you know, that, but you might look at it and be like, oh, this is a really pretty place. Oh, I see why it looks cheaper than everything else. There's an airport right beside it, you know, and so it would be noisy, or maybe you're okay with that. But, you know, you can find out some of those things, you know, before you take your time and energy or other people's to go. And we both found that really useful when we were looking for properties, to just kind of be able to eliminate some of the things without taking the time to go see them. What else do I have on my list? Oh, I think it's also a very good, and several people have mentioned this in comments on the last video, it's a good idea to talk to the neighbors. I talked about the things you can't really move, like I can't move the mountain that's there. You know, I can grow better soil, but I can't move the mountain. Neighbors can move and can change for sure, but I can't really move them. So if there's somebody you just can't handle living beside, that could be a big deal. But I did this even when my former roommate Beth and I were renting places together. When we were looking for a new rental, if we'd go, you know, check it out, we'd often go just talk to a few of the neighbors and say, hey, how do you like this here? What's the owner over here like? What do you think of the neighborhood? You know, and so, and just kind of get a feel for what the people who are already there think. That can be really helpful, especially if you talk to more than one and, you know, see what everybody thinks. Oh, we love living here. Well, you know, it's okay here, but we can't wait to get out. And you never know how honest they're going to be, but you can often get a general impression of somebody. And I know that it happened, you know, with another property sale I know that wasn't something I was looking at, but where it's a neighboring property to where I live, where there was a young couple looking at it. Looks like, if you come at the right time of year, it looks like a really cool property. There's a beautiful river that goes through it, there's woods, etc. And they were walking around looking at it, and they were, you know, thinking about buying it, and they came and talked to the neighbors in the process of that, and the neighbor said, well, you can, just so you know, the entire thing goes underwater at sometimes in the spring. And we already know, because the last owners who are now trying to sell it tried to build a house, that the county won't let you raise any ground at all. They say you have to build your house below the floodplain because they don't want to let you disturb any dirt. So just be aware of that. Those people backed out of buying it. But that was something that their realtor didn't tell them. Nobody else told them. But they found it out from talking to a neighbor, because the neighbor didn't care. It wasn't his property. He wasn't selling it. He wasn't getting a commission from it. So he could just say, hey, this is what I saw happen over there because I live here and I saw that. So you can learn really useful things that might save you a lot of hassle from the neighbors, as well as getting a general impression of, you know, are these people I, you know, may want to live around? Because there's also not just the immediate property neighbors, but look at a little bit what's going on in the area. If something's really important to you, just pick one thing, like, you know, raising a veggie garden. If every other single house in the whole county or town or whatever is perfectly manicured, you know, true chem lawns and that kind of stuff, even if there's no rules forbidding growing veggies in your yard, which I recommend everyone does, you may run into a lot of pressure from neighbors who just are very unhappy with you. That doesn't mean you shouldn't still grow food, but you should take it into consideration if that's something you really want to deal with. If a lot of other people in the area are interested in the same things as you, there's generally just a lot more support. So that's not like a, you know, necessarily hard deal breaker, but just something to consider. What are other people in the neighborhood doing and into that you can see, and is it similar or totally different than something you care about? Maybe you hate veggies in yards, so you want to be sure that no one in the area looks like they're doing it. Whatever the thing is for you. Then don't be, despite all these things I talked about, don't be scared of writing an offer. So if you're actively property shopping, and we did this multiple times, we'd find a place, everything we could tell about it looked like a go, there didn't seem to be any deal breakers or any major issue, and we'd go to either the realtor or the owner, whoever was selling, and say, you know, we would like to buy this property, we're offering this much. Then, of course, the owner has to accept or not. Sometimes we just got told flat out no. Interestingly, one time we had an offer accepted. It was like, so we're selling this plot of ground. And we said, okay, we're offering you this much money for it. And the owner said, okay, we'll take that offer, except I'm going to take off this chunk of the ground and this chunk and put a road through the middle. And we're like, no, and backed out of that deal. Do you really want a stick throne? You do. Very much so. Anyway, but you're not completely tied down to make an offer. So if it looks like a good deal, especially right now, things are selling super fast. So go ahead and write an offer. Say, I like this property, I'm offering you $100,000 for it, or whatever the case is. Then the owner could just, say, no, I'm not interested in that offer, and that's that. But even if they say yes, you still have, if you're using a realtor, they should be able to help you with this. But you can write any amount of time into that offer as your due diligence period. Now, like 2 to 4 weeks or something like that has been typical in my experience. I think it can often be a little more if you're looking at actually buying a house and wanting to do, house inspection type things. But if you're looking at bare land, it's often a little shorter. And you could write an offer that says, I'll buy your property for this much, but I want 2 years to inspect it. Likely the owner would say, no, I'm not interested in being tied up for 2 years until I know if you've made up your mind. So they would probably pick somebody else who showed up before you, but you could write it that way. But if you write it so that, there's 2 or 3 weeks before, hey, you're a little distracting now. We're just going to put it right there. Then in that time, you have time to do your due diligence. You can go do your own stuff, like I talked about, looking at the survey. Actually go out there and see if you can physically find the survey stakes. Do any more investigating you want. And if anything comes up in that period where you're like, oh, no, this is not okay, then you just walk away from it. Usually you have a deposit of, typically it's like $500, but in that due diligence period, if something comes up and you say, nope, this is something we're not okay with, the escrow company that's holding that should give that back to you, and you just go on with life. So it's not you're not 100% committed just because you wrote an offer or even got an accepted offer. Then for me, I also just have to work on not getting too attached to something in that process, because the minute I get on a place, I can look around and be like, oh, I envision my house here, my garden here, and a bush over there. And then I can get a little more emotionally tied up in it. Clay doesn't have this issue as much. He's more sensible about these things than I, and just really want to make it work, even if I start finding out things that mean it doesn't really make sense. So use some common sense. Don't get so emotionally wrapped up in it that you're then unwilling to walk away because you got feelings about this place now. And then in that due diligence period, you should a title company should be doing a title search. This should show any legally recorded things, and there should be title insurance. So they say, we're guaranteeing that this is true, this is the correct survey, this is the recorded easements, etc. And if something is later found out to not be the case, they're usually liable for, depending on how the policy is written, several $1 million to cover making that all right. So that's definitely something you want, but that title search should show all those things. It should show you any recorded easements, like we talked about, either that you need to get onto the property or that anybody else has access authorized onto or through your property. It should show you exactly where the boundaries are, and you should get that property description that says this is the legally recorded deed, so many degrees northwest, thence east to 0.8, etc., etc. And you should be able to see, does that actually match up with what I see here on the ground? Is it here? And somebody else brought this up, and I definitely found this to be true. Don't just assume because somebody says, oh, the property line's over there, like along that fence. Fences are not always right, and sometimes they're very, very wrong. Sometimes a few feet wrong, sometimes way, way wrong with where an actual property line is. That gets you back into the issues of, do you have space to do the things you want? Is that building on your property or halfway on their property, and so on. Also check out water rights. Back east, this generally wasn't a thing in my experience. It rains all the time for all practical purposes, but in most of the West, including the mountains, who owns the rights to use the water is a big thing. So there may be a stream running through the property, but another farmer may own all the water rights to it, and your property may not be allowed to use any water out of it. And maybe you're fine with that. You just get to look at the pretty water bubble by. But if you were counting on pulling water from that to do something like irrigate a garden or whatever, you want to check into who owns water rights. Or, you know, if you're planning to drill a well, you probably want to talk to other, get the well records for other areas, both to see if, you know, if it's possible to get well water in that area, because in the mountains there's not always just a water table that's lower or higher. Sometimes on the side of mountains there literally isn't any, it's just solid rock. Didn't matter how many 100 feet you would drill, there's not any water. But you can also get an idea of, were all the neighboring wells 60, 50, 60 feet deep, or were all the neighboring wells 300 to 400 feet deep? Because that'll give you an idea of, okay, if I'm planning to drill a well, this is probably how much money I'm going to have to plan to budget to invest in that. So that's worth looking into. Mineral rights, that's another thing. I've seen several properties for sale where they were selling you the property, but they kept all the mineral rights, which meant that if anybody ever found gold, oil, anything else valuable, some new mineral suddenly valuable that nobody's ever thought about before, etc. on your ground, the original owner who kept the mineral rights would have the right to come in and dig everything up to mine that, extract it, pump it out, whatever. You would not only not own it and not get any benefit from it, you wouldn't be able to control the fact that they've now torn up your yard or dug up your garden or whatever in that process. So again, you may be okay with that depending what you want to do, but it's something to be aware of. Let's see what else I had on my list. Oh, and then somebody else made this really good point. If you're driving around back to the general neighborhood and you're like, oh, I see a tiny house over there, so they must be all right here. Or, oh, I see somebody with chickens over there, so they must be allowed here. It's still worth checking into, because sometimes that person raising chickens over there, their great-great-grandpa had chickens, and then their grandpa, and then their, you know, parents, and now they do. And so it's grandfathered in. They're still allowed to have chickens because they've been doing it the whole time. But possibly since then, some rules in the county or subdivision or whatever have changed. And if you think you're going to do it, somebody's going to show up and say, that's not allowed here anymore, even though your next door neighbor's doing it. So that would just be a caution. Don't just assume because you see one person in the area doing something you want to do that there's not potentially restrictions to it. Also on building codes, you can usually find that info online for an area, for a town, a city, a county. You can usually find it on their website. They'll tell you what the building codes are, if there are any, and then if there are some, you know, what they are. You can generally read that whole thing. So that's another part of the research you can do for yourself from your own computer before going, you know, to look at something. And I just want to emphasize that I, in my experience, highly recommend you do all of this research yourself, because while there are a few good realtors out there who find some of these things, the majority are either too lazy to do that much work, or they're just motivated to get a commission selling it, and they don't care what you're going to deal with later. But either way, whatever problems arise, you're going to be the one stuck with dealing with it. So, and probably nobody else is as passionate about looking into details that affect your life as you. That's just kind of how things work. So I do recommend doing all this research, you know, back to the figure out what's important to you, because it's probably not the same things that were important to me, but what is it important? Why are you buying a property? What do you want to be able to do there? And then go through these steps to be sure when you purchase a place that it is actually what you wanted, so you don't get stuck with something that just makes your life really miserable for a while. So that's kind of the process of how I shopped, and then Clay and I together, when we were looking at properties, we'd, you know, find a listing on some online website, or, you know, if you're in an area, I definitely keep my eyes open as I drive around, because sometimes somebody just sticks a sign in their front yard saying property for sale and doesn't list it anywhere else. But, you know, find a property, then you can do a good bit of this investigating yourself. If somebody is helpful, they can put all that info right in their listing, but a lot of them don't, especially for bare land properties. So you got to go do a little digging around to see what all these details are, and if they are or not, you know, still interesting to you, then you can make an offer. You're not locked in at that point, but a reason to do that would be because if you want to think about it for 3 weeks and somebody else makes an offer, it may be sold by then. So if you really think there's a good chance from the things you can see that are obvious that you're interested, go ahead and make an offer. You're going to have your due diligence period to look into all these details. I would not close on a property where the sale's finalized until you're sure you've got all the details, but you can certainly make an offer before you've got all the details, because if one of those details comes up and they say no burleys allowed, you can just say, okay, that's a deal breaker for me, I'm out, and you know, it doesn't cost you anything. You're just out and you go back to looking. Anyway, hopefully some of that is helpful, because it took me a little while to, you know, a few years to learn all this, because I had to do a lot of my own research on a lot of properties, and that's how we ended up, a combo of all that is how we ended up working somewhere through the process of buying and then, you know, leaving different properties. Like I said, you'd sometimes have an accepted offer, and then something would come and you'd be like, oh, nope, that doesn't work for us. Or you'd write an offer and the seller would just flat out say, nope, I'm not taking that offer, and so on. So I've done this a bunch of times now myself, and it's how we ended up on the property that Nyth is going to be moving to really quick. So hopefully some of those tips are helpful for you guys as well, if you're also looking for homesteads, or just a property you want to live on, or a place to put a tiny house, whatever, for how to find a lot of that info so that you don't hopefully end up with too many big surprises after something is completely finalized. So that's my experience. Good luck to all of you who are looking. Oh, and yeah, I'm not a realtor or a legal professional. This is my experiences. Take that for what it's worth. Think for yourself, do your own research, and have fun. Hi folks, Ariel over here. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time watching these videos. Hopefully you found something beautiful, educational, interesting, peaceful, relaxing, or useful while you were here. If so, find more videos here, subscribe so you don't miss any updates, and if you like what you found here, feel free to like and share away so that others can benefit as well. You all have a wonderful day.